Hey everyone, watch this review here today with a look at the Marvel Select Juggernaut. Now, I'm going to be doing this review a bit differently in that I already shot the intro and accessory look, but I'm tossing that to the end of the review because, frankly, those things are kind of unimportant and boring compared to this big guy. Also, I'm just shooting during the morning because I'm hoping that the natural sunlight will allow some things to pick up a bit better than the normal lighting would. But this is the somewhat massive Marvel Select Juggernaut. This figure is almost 9 inches tall, which might make him, I don't know, slightly larger than scale to the Marvel Legends line. Here's the Marvel Legends Wave 10 Cyclops and the first appearance Spider-Man, same wave, just for a little height comparison here and everything. Just remember that the artwork for Juggernaut does kind of vary, and, some of it depicts him as being considerably larger, some of it depicts him as being a bit larger. Frankly, I've always preferred any representation where he's just this really huge, massive man-mountain, and this figure really captures it, whereas the Marvel Legends one, is more of a realistic size where, he's a bit bigger than them, but would still be within the size of realism when you put them next to each other. One of the big things that really bugged me about the Marvel Legends version is just the fact that he's not really overly muscled. I mean, yeah, he's got these pretty huge-looking muscles, but I mean, his torso area is kind of proportionate, whereas this one, is just a much wider character. The helmet, is a lot wider. I mean, all around. And quite frankly, this version's just a lot closer to how I personally envision the Juggernaut. Your mileage may vary. Now, as for the figure, it actually has, several different paint things going on, which is kind of weird. The torso has this one sort of basic color, which is repeated in the legs, where, you've got a certain amount of variation, but they opted to do something entirely different on the arms and helmet, where they tossed a sort of bronze or brass base down and then painted over it with a thicker tone of the same sort of dull red that you see on this portion. Just a bit lighter on the helmet, though. The problem with this is that it sort of lends itself to paint defects. I mean, if you look at this arm, you don't have as much of a coating over the bronze layer, so a lot more of the bronze shows through. And this one has more of an even paint job, so the bands are a lot darker. I'm also not even sure which way it's really supposed to be more towards, like whether you're supposed to see more of the bronze like on this side, or just basically a really solid layer of the same color, but you can see maybe specks of bronze underneath. I don't know, it's kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure how everybody else has turned out, although, same deal on the helmet, which again, is just less noticeable because it's on the helmet, so you don't have like another arm to compare it to. Some areas you'll see more of the bronze, some areas you'll see more of the red, but you don't have any of that bronze effect on the rest of the figure, although you do have varying degrees of red, where you've got brighter reds down here than deeper reds throughout, I guess, to probably represent shadowing and all that. And then you have a different color here for the mid-torso, sort of the same general color which is seen on the boots, which have sort of heavy shadowing, but a very nice amount of color and detail. However, the greatest parts, just when you look at the arms and stuff, and you look at the skin tone and everything that's going on there, I figure that really captured it a lot nicer than any other portion of the armor and stuff in terms of paint. Now, the only other really massive Marvel Select I'd bought previously was the Hulk. As you'll notice, the Hulk is a little bit taller, but this figure is just a tiny bit wider if you compare the two. The shoulder span just goes out a little bit more. And the arms themselves look thicker, even if they aren't necessarily the case. The more interesting detail about the two is if you own this, you probably picked it up. You know it feels kind of light. That's because the upper torso here is hollow. Now that's not the case, or at least doesn't feel to be the case here, where, you know, this is just a solid 2.5 pounds of plastic. And, you know, that's where you really know you're getting your money's worth, because, you know, 2.5 pounds of plastic for 20 bucks, that's a bargain. You know, given the weight and everything, you know, this isn't even so much a figure. This is also just a weapon. You can hit somebody with this, wham, give them a concussion. Pretty easily, too. In fact, you know, might be time to take the bat or whatever you use for security away from your bed. Just keep this guy in your nightstand. You know, nobody will ever see him coming. But seriously, despite the Rolk's somewhat taller stature and everything, when you pick him up, he's just a much lighter figure. He just doesn't feel the weight that he should be, whereas the Juggernaut feels the weight that he should be and quite a bit more. In terms of actual weight, I'm just, again, you know, I think he was between 2 and 2.5 pounds. The Rolk, I remember, was something over a pound. I think it was like 1.2 pounds maybe. So I mean, that's kind of interesting, although I can understand it where, you know, this was just a completely sculpted chest. They decided to go, you know, the light route, whereas this one has some articulation here in the torso. They probably had to use more plastic for it. So that kind of solves one mystery right there. In terms of articulation, we have nothing here at the wrists, which is kind of disappointing because he's kind of got it angled in like this, which is kind of an odd angle to actually punch somebody with. Although I guess you're kind of swinging with a punch. Yeah. I don't know. I don't do a lot of punching these days, believe it or not. Which is, you know, kind of different from the fact that they did include that in this figure. But up here we also have a single point here at the elbow. Not a huge range just due to the sculpt and the huge muscles. Point of rotation at bicep for all your flexing needs. You can also fist pump like a champion at that angle. Now there's somewhat annoying things, just the fact you have this huge gap here on each of the arms, and you actually have a considerable amount of flash on this one, where they didn't really cut cleanly from the mold, and it's just sitting there, and I can't figure out how to get most of it out. I managed to cut a portion here. It doesn't actually impede motion or anything, it just looks really, really weird. Then we have the head. No removable helmet. Instead they decided to do a unmasked variant, which, you know, is kind of lame. Torso articulation, barely any forward back, but you do get a bit to the side. Again, just really heavily impeded by the sculpt here. Leg is on one of those modified ball joints, you know, where you've got the line and everything, and then you have to sort of move it in conjunction to the line, then use the rotation at the upper thigh to even out where you want it to be. Although the problem with that, again, is the fact that you have that sort of open area that you don't want to have visible. And then single point here at the knee, fair amount of range. And at the ankle, we only really have some side pivot here. It's really not a lot of forward back, which is kind of funky. Although, you know, you also get the rotation, so it's kind of cool. All in all, from some angles, you know, this figure looks a lot cooler than others. I mean, head on, you know, looks pretty solid. My favorite angle is just like the over-the-shoulder one, where you just get a much more greater feel for the whole muscle and stuff for this character. Just trying to see how I'm focus that camera. You know, you can have the character like staring down somebody else, because when you're this size and you've got that much muscle, you can stare down a lot of people. Now, somewhat humorously, I do realize that up until now I hadn't even discussed the character's face, but he does have one underneath that really, really kick-ass helmet. You'll notice that there's a sort of fair amount of space, which really gives off the thickness of the metal, and you know, directly behind it, you have this really toothy grin and everything. And you know, there's a pretty cool amount of facial detail, but supposedly if you pull off the helmet, there's really not a lot to the actual face area. Basically, most of what you see here is what's actually there. But you know, just really neat. Of course, given that his face is just such a tiny portion of his massive form here, I mean, naturally I would kind of overlook discussing it. All in all, the Marvel Select Juggernaut is a great figure, besides also being an exceptional value, given that he's only 20 bucks for 2 to 2.5 pounds of plastic, especially when you compare him to the Marvel Legends version, which runs for, I don't know, all sorts of money these days. But, you know, on average, you'll probably be able to pick him up for under half the price of the Marvel Legends one, so, you know, definitely a consideration for you guys who don't have the other one. But yeah, either until next time, or if you want, here comes the packaging accessory talk. Hello everyone, Watch This Review here with a look at the Marvel Select Juggernaut. Now, usually I like to leave my Marvel Selects in package for a while, just because they make for good display pieces on their own, and, you know, several times I have mentioned that the box art itself is a, well, work of art. But, partly because I wanted the figure out and just, see what he looks like up close, I am opening this one right away. And also because I think the box art is lousy on this one. I mean, I'm not sure if it's because, you know, they opted for a full body shot here instead of using like a logo associated with the character or just a headshot. Or perhaps the fact that they opted for this side panel here, which features art, you know, I just don't exactly like. I mean, it's a different style and everything, but, you know, it's just something I don't feel like displaying. Also, he's on the heavier side, so that's a consideration. Back of the package, also kind of lackluster, but nobody really displays the back of the package anyway, so it doesn't matter. I don't know, maybe I'm being too critical, but whatever. Now, the variant for this figure is an unmasked version, which, you know, is kind of chintzy, but hey, I'm just pretty happy that we have a Juggernaut all at this point. All from the Marvel Select line, but hold on a second, I'll get this out of pack. Right off the bat, I will mention the Juggernaut's diorama accessory. You know, partly because I'm sure I'll forget about it, given how kind of cheap it is, but it's a card, and one side it has this really cool devastated city, on the other it has this sort of chintzy sunrise or explosion or some crap. And then you simply fold it towards which way you want, and you plug it into the little space here. I mean, it's definitely a creative idea, but as another reviewer pointed out, and maybe even several, it's not even half the height of the Juggernaut. I mean, if you're going to include something like this, it should at least be like a poster or something that is at least a little bit taller than the character. I mean, honestly, I'm not even sure this is fit for the Marvel Universe Juggernaut. And yeah, I mean, even the Marvel Universe Juggernaut is taller than this card they included with it, so I mean, something like that, I do have to agree, it's not really not worth including something at all. You know, gotta go a bit larger there. But hey, it doesn't really detract from the figure.